Saffron Walden in North Essex is an intriguing place. Ancient in origin, Walden means place of ancient Britons, and saffron tells of the 15th and 16th century trade of the product from the saffron crocus. This early wealth is displayed in the town's many well-preserved Tudor buildings lining its narrow streets. But the town's present shape owes much to one man, George Stacey Gibson, a Victorian gentleman, Quaker, banker, botanist, philanthropist, and one of the founding fathers of Barclays Bank. There have been Quakers, or Friends as they're properly known, in Saffron Walden since the foundation of the movement 350 years ago. They've been meeting on the same spot ever since, as I found out when I met Quaker member Gillian Parker at the Friends Meeting House. Tell me about the early days of Quakers here in Saffron Walden.
Quakers were here in about 1650, but their first meetings were held in two cottages, I think they were, probably weavers' cottages, just on the same site as this. The name of the road in those days was called Cooking Stool End with a K. And then I think in the Victorian times they built this meeting house. And in those days it was a big room, and it had a big gallery at the back, and all the children from the Friends School used to come down on Sunday mornings. The seats outside in the foyer were the original seats at the back of the meeting house.
Life was far from easy for Friends in those early days. Local historian Martin Everett explains.
They fell foul of the local authorities quite quickly. They were forbidden by the local authorities to hold meetings, and the doors of the meeting house were nailed shut. So on at least two occasions, and so they held their meetings in the middle of the street, as a result of which they were prosecuted. And one or more of the Quakers was a cheesemaker, and on one occasion some of the members had their cheeses confiscated. But it wasn't really until the 19th century when there was a change in the law which allowed nonconformists to stand for the council, and the Quakers really gained full acceptance. Gibsons had come to Saffron Walden initially as bakers, but subsequently they married into the Wyatt family, a Quaker family with extensive brewing interests. And this is really where the Gibson money came from. George Stacey Gibson had a very keen interest in botany from an early age, and so in addition to having a career in his family's banking interests, he also acquired a very large library of botanical books which he used as a working library, and most of those books have been transferred to this library after Gibson's death. This is George Stacey Gibson's Flora of Essex, which he wrote based on his extensive knowledge of plants. It's published in 1862, but it was the standard Flora of Essex until the 1990s when it was superseded. But you can still locate many of the plants in the surrounding area from using Gibson's Flora. Like the other members of his family, he was very philanthropic. He was one of the people that would provide funds for relief of poverty and things like that. The Gibsons started up their own bank in the 1830s, and that was the Gibson and Tooks Saffron Walden Bank, which later became a part of Barclays. He provided the money to extend the town hall and put the mock to the front on. There's the Sun Inn, which was in the Gibson family ownership for a while and has their stork, the family stork on it, but in the instance on the Sun Inn, it's a dancing stork. You'll also see storks over the entrance to Barclays Bank, but in this case they're flying. And you'll see storks in Bridge End Gardens, sort of dotted around in little statues. The Friends School came to Saffron Walden as a result of two sort of slightly different forces. One was a push from the people in Croydon, and they were upset about the possibility of cholera, and George Stacey Gibson was very interested in attracting them to Saffron Walden, so he provided land and money for a new building. George Stacey Gibson himself was very, very influential in bringing of the railway to Saffron Walden from Audley End. That was in 1865.
To celebrate the 300th anniversary of the Friends School, the town collaborated with the Quaker members and the school to produce a Quaker Trail, which tells the story of the Gibson influence. The trail is an easy and enjoyable way of learning about the huge contribution to Saffron Walden by the Gibson family, not the least of which is the beautiful Bridge End garden. George Stacey Gibson is buried along with many family members in a simple grave behind the Friends Meeting House. Gillian Parker describes Quaker burial practice.
Yes, he was buried in the burial ground, which is, you could say, it looks like a garden, but it's actually full of graves. The whole Gibson family is buried in the burial ground. No fuss, just a flat stone, just like everybody else. And so it didn't matter whether you were rich or poor, you were buried in the burial ground, but you still had the same stone as everybody else.
The Gibsons commissioned many of the buildings that dominate the streets of Saffron Walden. Among them the Corn Exchange, now the library, the Town Hall, George Gibson's home, Hill House, the hospital, now Uttlesford District Council offices, and the spectacular drinking fountain in the Market Square. This was originally designed by John Bentley, designer of the Westminster Roman Catholic Cathedral, and exhibited at the 1862 International Exhibition. George Stacey Gibson bought the fountain and gave it to the town to celebrate the wedding of the Prince of Wales to Princess Alexandra of Denmark in 1863. But what of the modern Quaker presence in the town? Not large, but still active, as Gillian Parker explains.
We have people who are active in peace work, in helping refugees and the homeless. There's a lady, one of our members, who's very actively involved in peace work in Palestine. But we don't go because we're Quakers, we go because it needs doing.
Although there are no longer any Gibsons in the town, their presence and legacy is evident everywhere in the modern, bustling Saffron Walden.